which is a live celebration of APIs hosted by Marqeta. Today, the topic will be how API-first technology is empowering the launch of card programs with a delightful and well thought out UX or customer experience that really and truly is digital first self-serve approach to ensure a really positive and enjoyable experience for cardholders like us. So user experience and UX are becoming a major battleground for customer acquisition and retention. And I, for one, actually know that because I make quite sharp decisions based on my onboarding journey, whether I actually stay with the provider or not. We can safely say that priorities have been shifting away from, I guess, perfecting the in-branch experience like we used to focus on some while ago towards really building intuitive and user-friendly tools that enable cardholders to control their finances quickly in real time and with minimal human interaction. So in the live stream today, we have the opportunity to dig into this topic in a little bit more detail with a panel of experts. I'm Anna Pora, the Strategy Director for Marqeta here in Europe. And today I am joined by 4 great panelists: Jazz Shah, product and consultant and founder of Bitsul; Mark Okef, Optima Consultancy; Arseny Korobachenko from Mambu; and James Lin from Currency. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, everyone. And in order to open up the discussion, I'd really like the panelists to give me a little bit more insight on who they are, their current role, and where that kind of sits in the UX environment. Mark, do you mind if we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So Mark O'Keefe, I've been in payments all my life, but the last 15 years we've run a specialist payment consultancy, Optima. I guess in this context, this is my wallet. So I guess I've got a lot of cards. So part of what we do as a consultant, I look like a fraudster, don't I? Got caught in the airport this week. Part of what we do as a consultancy is a lot of mobile app benchmarking. So we've opened all the accounts in the UK, and I literally mean all the accounts. So we've been through some of that pain, but we do a lot of benchmarking analysis, look at what's going on in terms of best practice. So that's part of, I suppose, why I'm engaged in this panel. And you can see my passions in life behind me, including Old Trafford. Oh, that way, Old Trafford there behind me. And I guess for anyone that can say what that other Lego item is on my shoulder there, I'll leave that one for the participants.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Jazz, can we move over to you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a product consultant. Worked in fintech for my whole career, which is longer than people think by looking at my face. So I've been across retail, investment banking, fund management, and the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years, I've just been dedicated to helping startups and financial institutes build better products, really. I think the most relevant experience recently has been working on a few challenger banking propositions. So I've led product strategy and worked on roadmap creation, and even gone down to the level of actually building and constructing user journeys for things like onboarding, cardholder interactions, payment interactions, adding payees, looking at support, and just generally loads of digital customer journeys across digital banking propositions. Some of those are kind of close to launch, and then some are live and actively being used across the globe. But essentially, I just look at helping early stage startups and financial institutes across the whole product life cycle, from ideation and discovery to launch and scale of a product.
Excellent. Look forward to hearing your views. And James, can we go over to you?
Yeah, hi. So I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Currency. Currency is the world's first open banking debit card. So we use open banking to connect a debit card to an existing high street bank account. So removing all the challenges around topping up and prepaying, etc. So for me, the whole UX side of things is absolutely crucial. So as a co-founder of this, both co-founders spend a lot of time and energy focusing on UX and looking at that to really ensure that journey is as good as it possibly can be, because we see it as a big differentiator and a huge value add for customers and consumers. So hugely important for us, this whole topic.
Brilliant. And we'll unpack that in a minute. Artini, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Super nice to be here today. I am a solutions architect at Mambu. I actually have been building technology for all my life. Which is pretty much probably the same amount of years as Jess has actually. But over the past maybe 15 years or so, primarily financial technology. So actually having built things by hand. But for the past maybe 10 years or so, mostly doing a lot of the architecture work, which doesn't necessarily directly relate to UX. Some might say, what does it actually have to do with it? But especially in my current role at Mambu, it's not only about the sort of Mambu platform itself, but it's mostly about everything that is connected to it, right? And that's mostly things which actually create those customer journeys, which enable them, which make sure that most of the things are happening either STP or at least the employee experience is there to facilitate the customer experience. So super happy to be here today and talk about how things actually connect in the systems world, and maybe talk a little bit more about some technical stuff as well.
Brilliant. So I look forward to picking all of your brains. So let's get started. So first thing I really want to, I guess, explore with you guys is, we know that UX is becoming more important for cardholders and consumers. But how important do you think it is getting UX right in order to achieve in converting customers? Can we start with James?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's absolutely crucial. So we have dashboards all over the wall. We have these massive screens all over the wall, which show every stage of the funnel every day for the onboarding, whether it's that first screen and someone's inputting their email, their mobile, and that's one of the most important metrics for us, because ultimately for every customer that shows an interest and starts at the top of that funnel and the onboarding funnel, there's a drop-off point. You've paid money to get that customer at the top, so every single customer you lose through that onboarding journey is a massive expense. So improving that through A/B testing at every single stage is something that never stops. So for us, that's something we've absolutely focused on, and it's critical from a commercial angle, and also from that sort of first impression angle for the consumer. And you mentioned that it's an important part for you. So our average sign-up time is around 3.5 minutes to get an account set up. And because we use open banking, etc., we can make it really, really streamlined. But the importance of that, I think no one should underestimate. If it's clunky, you lose people, and those people that do go through start off with a really sour taste in their mouth. So hugely important.
And Mark, what's your perspective on that? We can't quite hear you, Mark.
Sorry, that's because I put my other microphone on mute there. Thank you.
No problem.
I was saying I agree with James. And measurement's really important. And I mentioned about all the app benchmarks we do. How long does it take for your banking app to open? Are you measuring that? Do you have an expectation? And now some of the apps we test, it's 14 or 15 seconds to open up. Yeah, I see James wincing, and that's it. So are you measuring it? And I saw a few years ago now a great blog post by Monzo saying, we were looking at our app. We realized it was taking a long time to load on iOS. And that tells you a lot of things. One, they're looking at their app and they're measuring those sort of points, to James's point. And two, they've got an expectation of good. So they're saying it was taking 4 seconds. So we fixed it and it's back down to 2.5 seconds. So a great example of where you measure, where you set those expectations, not forgetting, of course, that the bar gets moved on as well. So our expectations about how quick things should be, how seamless, change according to other things we use, not just banking apps, but whether that's the way we display stuff in a TikTok or an Instagram or whatever that is. Customers get used to seeing things in different ways. And I think fintech apps, banking apps have got to move along with that. And get off mute, of course. They are nice little UX experience.
Yeah, there's a learning point for sure. But looking at the other end, I guess, of the impact to the business and to the user, the consumer, Jazz, can you talk me through your perspective on the importance of UX on retention? Because again, from my personal experience, I've been through journeys where it's all very digital, it's all very non-human contact, but sometimes things have failed and I found myself with nowhere else to go.
Yeah. I think we're at a kind of blended period at the moment. I think more generally when we talk digital, I think there's around 4.6 billion people across the world are considered active internet users, which is 60% of the population. So if we go from that previous point around how important is UX, well, every single day it's becoming more and more important in terms of digital because that C is rising. So more and more people are being captured as part of that digital, that normalized digital journey. But in terms of retention, I think people's first port of call that they're comfortable and actually prefer, like an in-app chat or a digital channel, but they want to know that there is someone behind that digital wall, and it's not like an empty vacuum of bots and automated responses. And I think that does feed into you have to make a digital journey kind of viable for offboarding as well as onboarding. Like it can't just be about getting everyone into the app, because when people offboard, they'll leave a bad review if they, if it took them 10 hours to get money out and then they decide to leave and then it took them another 2 days to get in touch with someone. It's a frustrating experience. People are more likely to leave a bad review when they've had a really, really bad experience versus if they've had an okay experience. So I think, it affects everything from keeping a customer to them telling 5 of their friends that don't use this app, it's really bad, I had a really bad experience. And obviously we all know that you're more likely to give more weight to a review that your friend gives you, the same way that recommendations work, and that we can go back to Monzo and talk about that referral engine that really helped them boost customer numbers early on. It was word of mouth, and it works inversely as well when it comes to bad reviews. So it can work negatively as well as positively.
Yeah, and Mark, what's your opinion on that importance for retention?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, if you take a look, and Jazz mentioned a couple of examples of a Starling or Monzo. So Starling have had the most current account switches now for a number of quarters, and they're doing something different from incumbent banks. They're not throwing 150 quid at customers. They're using word of mouth. They're using referrals. They're using those customer recommendations. But I'm also one for going and being sad enough to look through the investor relation decks of all the big banks for their digital measures. And the last one I saw from, I see some smiles there, the last one I saw from NatWest, who talked about 60% of their retail banking customers are entirely digital. And to that point, if you're, you might have previously said, well, you've got customer service, you've got branches and so on. Come on to branches later, I guess. But, actually, if their customers are entirely digital, it's very easy for them to experiment with another digital provider. To James's point, they can open another account in 3 minutes. They might not have the intention of it making their everyday bank, but then actually they try it out and they like it. And if the user experience is fundamentally different and slicker and better, then what's to stop them make that migration? So I think that retention is critical in terms of, one, as I talked about earlier, keeping up with the trends, keeping up with the functionality and the features and the user experience, making sure it works. But it's absolutely critical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally endorse that as well. Moving on to how banks, I guess, and fintechs, given that we're coming up to 2023, how should they be approaching looking at their customer UX in the year ahead? Can we take that to Arsene, please, first?
That's a very good question because, how has it actually changed over the past 5 to 10 years, right? What is the major driving factor today that makes it so different from the years before? And I think for a lot of the organizations, and I'm probably looking at incumbents more than I'm looking at fintechs, I think COVID was actually a blessing, right? It was that necessary kick that actually made them implement a lot of things and change a lot of things. And when Mark was talking about 65% of NatWest actually only
60% they last
60%
reported,
been only digital, that's amazing. But that means that quite a sizable institution actually had to make sure that all the services which would be typically provided through a branch or elsewhere would have to be digitalized, right? So I think the complexity of making sure that user experience is actually consistent across the board, not only from the branch perspective or call center perspective or an agent perspective or an intermediary perspective, right? It's all the same, and it all has to be digital. And that's quite amazing, right? So I think for a lot of larger banks, for them, it was unfortunately a necessary evil to make sure that they could make that necessary step forward, right? To sort of raise their bar, to be a little bit better, to get on par with some of the newer fintechs. So I think that new demand for the UX is very much driven definitely by the digital technology, but for a larger institution, it's just making sure that whatever is behind everything digital, bringing that to the same level of automation, the same level of communication, making sure that the customer journeys are consistent across different channels, making sure that all of that is converged and integrated in a nice way through the APIs, is probably the necessary thing to think of now, right? And that's the change we're all expecting as customers as well.
Absolutely. And James, I guess we've now moved from the larger institutions to the fintechs. I'd love to understand what some of the key UX related priorities you have in mind for Currency for 2023.
I mean, I think to Mark's point, expectations have moved on. People are expecting so much more now. So actually, the speed of response of an app is massively important. And when it comes to loading and things like this, some of the older high street banks have even put some videos in the background. But there's only so many times I can sort of see a video of a boat and things like this going on while I wait 10 seconds for an app to load before that video gets a little bit dry. So there are expectations which have moved on. But there's also a commercial angle to UX. So if we take some of the challenger banks, things like bill splitting, savings pots, they are purely UX based. There's nothing massively complex going on behind the scenes. It's all UX based, but yet they are locking in customers really cleverly by a UX feature. If we take one well-known challenger bank, it was the second most popular feature we found in a survey. FX was the most important. The second most important was savings pots. So actually, you're suddenly taking an entire base, locking them in based on the fact they've got savings pots in an app. Not massively complex, but it shows the power of the UX from a commercial angle there.
That's so interesting. And in terms of, there's another theme, obviously, that's top of many people's minds at the moment, and it's the economic environment that we're in and the cost of spending. And the question I had is, during a period of financial hardship, are there any additional considerations that should be had around UX? Mark, maybe one for you.
Yeah, so I think if we look, it's a tough time for everyone, isn't it? And if you look at two aspects, I suppose one is about the situation people are in with the cost of living crisis. You also overlay that with the FCA's consumer duty. A bigger responsibility on participants in the ecosystem to give more of a parental responsibility. Now, how might that manifest itself in UX? So take someone like Monzo, who often come up in examples, within their UX, do you need to tell us something? A very, very smart way of giving an open-ended option to a customer. Do you need to talk to us about something? And you can contrast that sometimes to almost like the computer says no, or, you've got some menu options. What do you want to tell us about? It has to fit one of these brackets versus actually, we recognize you might need to just tell us about something. So here's a channel to be able to do that. I think to James's point, it's really interesting around, capabilities and the UX side, because you can look at something like freeze your card, which technically has been around for ages, but was actually sort of pioneered in terms of user experience by the fintechs. And now everyone everyone needs to have it. But the way it's delivered across different providers is really, really interesting. So you can take without bad mouthing certain banks. So you can take someone like Lloyd's. You want to go and freeze that card. If I go into the app, I can find it. That's good. They've put it in a better place now. It's under card management. So I know that sort of seems logical. But I've got 3 options. I can freeze it at point of sale. I can freeze it online, or I can freeze it for e-commerce. Well, no, I just want to freeze it. And then if I click to freeze that, it says, well, it won't block all transactions. So it puts all these warnings around. If you go to a Monzo or a Starling or a Revolut, it's up on the front, the image of the card, 1 click froze, So actually, if customers have got worries, cost of living crisis, can they navigate? Can they find the help easily? Can they contact you in the ways that they want to contact you, be it through chat, or maybe they want to pick up the phone? So there's so many ways. I think the fact that we're all living in these phones so much more, that's how we want to be able to talk to people and get across our concerns.
Yeah, that's really interesting lens, actually. And I love the reference you made earlier about the open questions. So is there anything that you need to tell her, I suppose, giving the consumer the opportunity to raise something that's on their mind during this difficult time. Moving slightly on, I'm really curious to ask Arseny whether you think that banks are catching up at all. They've had to play catch up. Are they more agile now? How are they faring from a CX perspective?
That's a good one. Are they actually catching up? Are they? Like I think they are. No, I think they are. Like in all reality, I think they are. I think it very much differs country to country, right? I professionally cover EMEA, so that's like extremely diverse, right? That's just extremely diverse, and sometimes incumbents are just incumbents, right? And they just consider they're very strong position in the market. They're very well protected by the regulators. There are no new players on the market. They're not really getting that, churn to a challenger, and all the typical pains that you would typically see in the markets like UK or the continental Europe, stuff like that. But I think a very interesting thing is what they can actually learn from those fintechs and how they're actually learning from the fintechs, which are definitely superior user experience wise. That's not even a question, right? Because that's the nature of the business. But I think going back to what I said before, and going back to Mark's point on a huge amount of traditional banks customers actually wanting a proper digital experience, banks actually have a problem, right? Just due to the diversity of the services which they offer. And I'm even talking about the cards, right? The number of cards products a typical traditional bank offers is, of course, much higher than any challenger would offer at any given time, right? Especially with acquisitions, especially with just a lot of history being built up through the years. So how can they make sure that they can offer that consistent, on par user experience across not only all the channels, but also across all the products that they offer? I think it is really difficult, but I think there is some movement towards that. But the biggest question is, can technology actually facilitate that? Can you actually make sure that you can, as a bank, kind of mimic whatever a fintech can do, but the fintech is running on one stack, most likely, very modern stack, which actually enables the fintech to do that UX across the board. A bank is probably running on, multiple stacks, multiple cores, multiple historically built channels, a lot of self-build, a lot of legacy. How can you actually transform that? And that is always going into the same story, right? What is a digital transformation? Unfortunately, because that is something that is driving user experience eventually. And it's really interesting to see how, in some cases, banks actually try to focus so much on the customer-facing stuff that they completely forget about whatever is happening in the backends, and how whatever is happening in the backends actually influences the customer-facing stuff. That's a really interesting one. I don't know. We'll see probably in the next few years how that catching up game actually plays out, right?
I was going to say,
Jazz.
Can I jump in? I was going to say, I agree with basically every single thing that Arseni's just said, because banks are like a snowball that's been thrown down a mountain about 150 years ago, maybe 250 years ago. Now that, that snowball is massive, it's huge. To kind of deconstruct it, to look inside it, tough. Fintechs have, a snowball that's just been thrown, gathered at a bit of pace, but they're small enough to kind of move and navigate. To move that massive snowball, it's kind of crushing everything in its path. And then you look at, transformation projects. I think nowadays, from now, the next 10, 15 years, we'll truly see if banks are able to be more agile, because I think massive transformation projects in terms of tech stack have fallen by the wayside. They used to be really prevalent. I've worked on a couple, or as part of a couple, and I think lots of the senior people within banks, mainly because a lot of the senior people within banks are now senior people who have come from fintechs, know that these huge transformation, like cross-channel tech transformation projects, don't work. If we want to build something like a separate proposition, we'll use someone like Mambu, like Marqeta. We'll put these pieces together. We'll spin it up as a kind of separate instance within the brand umbrella.
Yeah.
And if we do that more and more and more, and we kind of move things over to Mambu, to Marqeta, to other tech providers, it makes it easier for us to change if we want to change. And we're that change is dependent on the external provider, rather than having a 5-year project with a plan that often doesn't work. After 2 years, it gets scrapped because the senior leader moves on, and that senior leader wants to come in and put their own stamp on things. And there's a new plan every 2 years.
Do you know what? And I've seen a few of those myself, living through them, where programs start and finish, but the end product was dubious.
Yeah, and tech debt. I think everyone knows what tech debt is, especially people who work in banks, because they probably use that word probably on a daily basis. We can't do it because of tech debt. We can't do it because of tech debt. And tech debt gets built up because people make decisions and they kind of don't follow through.
Just jumping in there, it's interesting, Jazz. You go back to that example I gave with, and Lloyds aren't alone in it, but you look at the freeze card thing. It's not necessarily tech debt that's stopping that, but it's actually almost cultural. So that'll be the compliance function. Say, you can't tell the customer the card's frozen, because technically, if someone didn't ask for card authorization, that transaction would go through. It's like, well, that's the same if Monzo or Starling or Revolut have frozen the card, but they don't seem to need to worry the customer with that nuance of the the legalities of it. And and again, that's part of the brand protection, the customer protection, the worry, the concern. But there is that sort of perfection ambition that you see in a lot of the retail banks, which is they won't deploy their first draft of a chatbot out there because it's got to go through so many bells and whistles and checks and balances before they get it out there. So they don't get that learning as quickly. And I think that sort of customer feedback on the UX is so important, that it's something that the fintechs do so much better, I think.
Sorry, James. Sorry, James.
Yeah, I think the culture of a bank changes things enormously. To Arseni's point, you've got what happens on the back end impacts what happens on the front end in a lot of situations. So if the culture of the back end is only changes allowed every 6 months, a change freeze 2 months over Christmas, whatever it is, that has a knock-on impact onto the UX on the front end. So you have a situation where you're looking at something like a freeze or basic functionality, and that culture of slow, risk-averse change is very hard to be running at 2 speeds in different areas within banks, because there's always some crossover, no matter how you try and split things up. So I think that makes, from a UX perspective, makes it a lot harder for banks to run fast, keep ahead of things. It's just a really hard thing to do, and they're getting better, but it takes a long time to catch up. And then you've got fast fintechs who can just jump ahead so much more easily when a new idea comes up. So it's a hard challenge.
Absolutely. And actually, sticking with who's doing things well, I'd love to hear from Mark around who is doing things well. How are we measuring? What does good actually look like in this environment?
Yeah, so look, I don't want to be dissing all the incumbent banks all the time. So let me call out NatWest actually for one thing that I think is, and it talks to an interesting point that I think we've touched upon around, what are the strengths perhaps of the old bricks and mortar. So take something like video appointments, video banker conversations. So you can go and get an instant video chat conversation in the NatWest or the RBS app. Now that's really powerful. And that's, if you think on the back of the pandemic, people comfortable, even grandmas and granddads comfortable on Zoom. So actually the ability to say, well, do you know what? Yeah, it's inconvenient for me to perhaps go down to the bank branch, or maybe the one near me is closed, but actually not sort of an old way of thinking that says, well, do you want to make and schedule appointments? It's like, no, do you know what? It's 10 o'clock at night now. I quite fancy having a chat about a mortgage, for example. I've just seen 10 o'clock news has just scared me to death. Maybe I want to talk about a mortgage, but that's not something I want to do in an app, as in I don't want to go and search that information on the phone. I want to have a conversation. But the ability to go click, book an instant appointment, I think is really, really powerful. And I think it's probably that element of where I would say you see an example perhaps of an incumbent do something well, where they recognize they've got something perhaps that some of the fintechs haven't. So where is it that they can compete? I think one good example of, I think, is a great experience for me is someone like Starling. So again, if I'm in the app and I'm having a chat conversation maybe, or I'm looking for something and I want to speak to a person, there's a dynamic 6-digit code that's refreshing every 30 seconds. If I do want to pick up the phone and call them, quote that code and I'm done. I'm done with my authentication. There we go. That's a really nice way to join the digital to the human experience there. So I think that's two examples, I suppose, almost trying to merge together, I suppose, the digital experience to the physical side. Chat's another example, and again, you can look at your own experience of how well a couple of things, I suppose. How well are people telling you whether they're using a chat bot? Is it blatantly obvious? Are they upfront about what it can do? Are they giving you an avenue to talk to a human? And how sophisticated? Again, if you take a lesson from me in this session, go and look over the investor relation decks. But another one from NatWest, everyone's got chatbots now, and I think they were quoting the number of conversations with their chatbot are growing exponentially. But I think they were saying 57% didn't require human intervention afterwards. So that's pretty good in terms of saying, actually, that chatbot is getting better at helping customers navigate. So I think those that are where it doesn't feel like you're chatting to some ridiculous robot that's not listening to you, to actually it's an intuitive, good way of finding the answers you want. I think those are probably 2 or 3 themes that I think are good examples of things being done well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the video option is fascinating, and it was NatWest that you mentioned before about having 60% of their people digital, and does that video count as digital or?
Yeah, so the stats have talked about how many of their retail customers bank entirely digitally. So in other words, they're not going into a bank branch, they're not picking up a telephone. So it's actually their engagement is through online or through their app. They release stats on the video banking. So I think I think they're having 10,000 a week, and that's quite an impressive stat from having 100 in Jan 2020. So in that sort of 18-month period, it's kind of exploded, and I think that's also a reflection on us as consumers. It's a reflection in a way on the challenge they're facing on closing bank branches.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've got lots of horror stories about myself going into bank branches, but, there aren't many reasons now you need to go into a bank branch, and therefore they are closing them down. Some of the reasons you want to go in there because you probably want to talk to a human. So I think that for me is a logical way for them to solve that.
And last reflection from me is I wonder whether it's also a endemic of the range of generations that they also have on their books, and therefore it's not just a TikTok generation, but it's also people who are used to having that face-to-face channel interaction.
And that's probably one of the hurdles that they have as incumbents actually is how do they continue to serve that end of their customer base when actually the new guys don't necessarily need to take any of them on in the first place. But I would say, and I think, I can't remember whether Jazz mentioned it or Arsene, if actually you struggle with the digital and you need to talk to someone and there's no avenue to do it, then that becomes really frustrating. That becomes then a real pain point. And you've seen, in the press, a lot of fintechs get some bad press there in that respect.
Yeah, thank you all. Moving the discussion slightly on, I'm curious about invisible services. And Arsene, can you tell me what would you describe as an invisible service and how does that actually help improve UX?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? We always think about UX as customers as something that we actually directly interact with, right? So we actually assume that as customers, everything that we receive as a service is either fully automated. It means that it just happens for us, right? We don't really think what actually goes into making those things happen. And I think that is exactly one of the challenges for the traditional banks, right? A lot of the manual processes behind the scenes, which are now being hidden by digital channels, but they still exist, right? It means that there are actual employees somewhere at the desks, somewhere in the offices, actually doing some work that makes sure that experience that the end customers are getting is good. So that is about all those, air quotes, invisible services, which are helping facilitate that. And can they facilitate that for the bank, right? That's what the challenge is. I was at an industry event yesterday here in Amsterdam, and it was really funny. There was like this big slide saying, let's make employee technology investments make customer impact. But that is the challenge for a traditional bank, right? How can you make sure that not only your front office people can actually properly communicate with the customers through whatever channels the customers use, but also your middle office people can help your front office people. Okay, back office is a different story, of course, but in general, that challenge of making sure that a good employee experience actually drives a good customer experience, making sure that the systems are integrated, making sure that the data flows are consistent, making sure that whatever can be STP is actually STP. And that is a really interesting one. And sometimes it is technology limitation. Sometimes it is like risk averseness, as Mark mentioned, of a traditional bank, which says, oh no, there has to be a person that has to check this because we've been doing it like that forever. And that is really interesting how that will actually change with a completely different approach from the customer that actually requires a different experience, right?
Very interesting. Thank you for that. And
just jumping in there, so you saw Bunk win a legal case against the Dutch regulator about the use of AI for money laundering and so on. So really interesting, almost like, fintechs challenging the regulators here as to, what role, it's all almost an invisible, behind the scenes, how is that, is that working? A great example, I think.
That relationship is critical, really. So this is an API Chronicles live stream. So I want to go back to actually understanding how much of the cardholder UX experience is actually linked or down to APIs. James, can we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to this whole performance and timings around this again. So we use a huge amount of partners in our app, in our service. And for me, it's all around building what you're good at and using APIs and partners for what is not your core strength. And the speed of those APIs is absolutely critical. The reliance and the reliability of those APIs is absolutely critical to get that good UX and user experience. It's like if we take the onboarding experience. So while someone's doing an onboarding, they'll be doing with us, they'll be doing an open banking journey, we'll be doing KYC, PEP, sanctions, AML checks, all that sort of thing. That will all just happen as they're doing their open banking journey. And it's just done in the background. There's no selfies, passports, photos. It's all beautifully API driven, unbelievably fast. Now, if one of those APIs was unreliable or slow, the whole journey breaks. We lose the customer. So reliability and quality of those APIs and speed of those APIs is absolutely vital to a good service. You're only as strong as the weakest link. So vital.
Critical. And again, we go back to the onboarding journey, but I honestly think that that's one of the biggest changes, because all the steps that you mentioned, just how long they used to take before the API era is just incredible. And it's not that long ago that we were having to take all of that information into our local branches.
Just to jump in, Anna, I ran a quick straw poll just before, I think yesterday or the day before. You know, what's more important to you when going through a digital banking onboarding journey flow or onboarding flow? And most people said speed of onboarding, rather than robust authentication and security or explanation of key features. Speed of onboarding was the biggest one. It wouldn't necessarily be my tick box, but most of my network are fintech, tech professionals, and they still said speed of onboarding. So again, it goes back to James's point that APIs facilitate that speed of onboarding, because if you want to onboard a traditional bank account, you go into a branch, fill out a physical form. Even the act of writing letters out is way slower than clicking Google SSO and having your name, first name, surname, email address. Even that little step skip saves 30 seconds to a minute. It can make a massive difference to whether you get bored or not. Maybe it comes back to, I don't want to label TikTok generation, but attention spans. I think attention spans do affect onboarding. If your onboarding is more than 5 to 10 minutes, I think people kind of drop off and don't necessarily come back. If there's distraction, so it massively affects whether people get into the app and kind of success rate, really.
For me, it's multitasking, because I think it's worked really well. I've been doing a few things at once and still managed to get my virtual card in my wallet within a few minutes, which is incredible. And Mark, your opinion on the importance of APIs to deliver a decent or a great experience?
Yeah, I agree with both comments so far. It's critical, and again, it's interesting to see those differing approaches, because you can look at people that try and do most of the things themselves, and you can see where they kind of fall down. So take open banking as a good example, and James talked about that. So if you look again about the approach for the CMA9, the big banks, that having been obliged to do the work themselves, think, well, actually then what we'll do, if we'll offer a great service to our customers, we can show you the other banks. But rather than then partnering with someone that's got that very responsive one API with a lot of coverage, they'll do it themselves. It won't be as slick and reliable, and therefore actually what they're offering in user experience at the front end to the customer is nowhere near as good. I think it's also interesting about how it gives more flexibility, so you can start to see how things play out. Whether it's you've just ordered a new card and then you've got perhaps a tracking reference for the card delivery. So you start to see our expectations that have come from other things. If I order something online, I expect to be able to, look, if they send me a tracking reference and I click on the reference and it doesn't show us being able to track it right now, I'm annoyed. So, we've got this expectation. We talk about the TikTok generation. My daughter, and don't judge me, she's 11, but she's got TikTok because she lied about her age on the. But, if I'm ever looking at something on the phone with her, she has no patience. Literally, I'll be waiting for it to load that millisecond, and she's going and pressing my screen. I go, just hang on a minute. But again, that's kind of that nature. To James's point about the reliability, the speed, it's so important. And I think, APIs sit at the heart of that, I think.
Any additions, Arsenal, or do you think the team's covered it all?
No, yeah, I think everything was absolutely to the point. But yeah, I think just to add to that, it's not just the sort of how quick and reliable your APIs are, right? But it's also about thinking what kind of a partner you're supposed to choose that will actually fit into your overall architectural approach, right? Because sometimes, even for larger banks, even for the ones who actually have those huge IT budgets and huge IT teams, whatever, it's sometimes really a challenge, right? To make sure that they can actually feed that really great vendor into whatever they can offer. And this way, yeah, eventually user experience will suffer. That's absolutely what Mark was talking about with regards to open banking, right? Why build things yourself when you can actually go to the market and pick something up that is already there, that is way superior than whatever you would be investing in yourself, and just just deliver that to the customers, right? So I think it is a challenge also, not only from the technical perspective, right, non-functional perspective, making sure that it's fast, that it's reliable, but also from the functional perspective, what can you actually get out of it? What is the actual value that you as an institution are creating to your customer eventually?
And you just reminded me of one there, asking me about, it amazes me the apps that have, ATM or branch locators. Why? Well, that's what Google Maps is for, yeah? They did a lot better because it'll do directions. So again, it's kind of that sort of old school thinking. If that's what customer needs, they want to find an ATM or a branch, what they'll do is they'll log into our app. 14 seconds later, they'll go and find that buried in a menu and look for the ATM locator.
Yeah, and all of that behind login, right? So you actually have to log into the app to find the branch. That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, what is so secretive about it? Like, why do you have to be a customer to actually find the branch? That's really funny.
I love that because I haven't seen that yet, actually. But sticking with the partner theme, and James, you alluded it. You referenced partners earlier. I'm just curious to understand how, I guess, important they are and their speed of development and their journey into, I guess, your own business's outputs and journeys and ability to deliver the UX that you want to deliver.
Vital. The whole thing is vital because doing anything new, whether it's whatever sort of project that is, you're ultimately reliant on the speed of which the partners can move, and whether that's including Apple Pay or Google Pay in a platform, or whether it's looking at going out to a new country and scaling out there. If you can move incredibly quickly as a fintech, but your partners are still lagging behind and they need sort of old school project life cycles, and you're going slowly grinding down to a difficult place. That's really painful. So whenever we look at all our partners, one of the first questions we ask is, first of all, are they very, very API driven? Do they have sandbox environments? Do we actually need to have a huge consulting project to figure out how to actually do something, even to get on the sandbox environment? Or what do we do? So actually, the speed and agility of those partners and the speed they can do those projects is really, really important to us. So an API-driven, forward-thinking partner, cloud-based, massively important.
Critical characteristics, they sound like. And Mark, what's your opinion on where partnerships have worked well and dependencies?
It's so fundamental in some respects, and I think I can't remember if it was Jazz that mentioned around sort of retail banks and having lots of products and so on. Almost, or maybe it was Arsene. I apologise, but kind of. So therefore, actually, they're doing everything themselves, and I think you can kind of look at the fintech space. Well, actually, maybe that's not us, but maybe we can partner. Maybe we can show you some of that information. We can link to offers, or we can link to insurances and so on. So I think they can build a better offering by having that right partner. But I share James's point around making sure they're aligned and they're not holding you back. I think it's probably also it's about can they help you get over some of those cultural hurdles if you're one of the older banks? Can they speed up the way you think about things? Again, if I look at the average number of app updates that some of the challenger brands do, they're doing 2 or 3 a week. You look at some of the incumbents, they're doing 1 or 2 a year. And again, you might say, well, does that matter? Well, it matters for fixing bugs. It matters for releasing features. And it matters because some of these guys that don't do app updates very often then actually reset all your credentials. You've got to remember what those login usernames and passwords you set 4 years ago were. Yeah, that's then you lock yourself out. Then you can't actually speak. So look, I think the choice of all those things are really important. And that is kind of that, without using the buzzwords of embedded finance, that's kind of the direction we're going. And I think it's about, partnerships. It's about, doing what you can do well. And I think that's kind of an interesting, way forward, I think, for people.
Excellent.
I was just gonna jump in terms of
yeah,
my
go for it,
experience.
Daz.
I think the thing that usually works well in terms of that relationship is not just the partner providing the right stuff, having the APIs to connect to, having a sandbox environment. I think lots of those things are for the partners are becoming standard. So most of the partners out there will have that. Most of the good partners will. I think where the relationships that I've been part of and I've worked on and seen are where the person looking for that partnership themselves knows exactly what they want to build. They have a clear and concise roadmap for 6, 12, 24 months, not necessarily set in stone, but they know the kind of stuff they want to do. And all of that roadmap is based off customer research, market research, trend analysis. It's all cemented there. So when they do things like maybe some boring stuff that people might not know about, but vendor selection questionnaire that people fill out, they know exactly what to write in each box, and they know exactly what APIs are you going to want to connect to day one, so that the vendor can set the environment up correctly, prioritize the right APIs. I think usually it's where the individual organization knows exactly what they want upfront initially, and knows where they want to be over the next short to medium to long term. Those are the partnerships that tend to really work over the long term, from what I've seen.
Really, really fascinating, and a range of practical points. Yeah, Arsene, go for it.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, because it's really interesting that my day job, right? It's really interesting in Mambu, because architecting things on Mambu is basically architecting things around Mambu, right? So because of the software as a service nature of things, we're actually looking at how the core itself integrates with everything else outside. And as a proud partner of Marqeta, thinking about partnerships is what we typically do day in, day out, right? And especially for us, when we're bringing that proposition to the end customer, which in our case is a financial institution, non-financial institution, doesn't really matter. We first of all have to be confident in whatever services that partner can give, but also we have to be confident in the fact that we can actually together deliver that consistent experience that the bank or fintech actually wants to achieve, right? And that is the most challenging thing. So really figuring out, navigating that partner world and making sure that you actually have the best of breed vendors as your partners is something that actually drives the success here. So I think the future is absolutely moving towards those specialty solutions and the need to partner together to make sure that we can actually all together deliver good experience to our clients, basically.
Well, thank you for a comprehensive response on that particular lens. I think it will be really, really useful for those listening in. And to close this off, I'd love to pick your brains on what's next. So what's next in terms of UX, for innovation associated with UX? Because I guess copying just what's best in the market at the moment isn't really necessarily innovation. So what are your perspectives on that? I'll go to Mark first.
So copying some of UX isn't a bad thing. We can think of some of the best organizations for UX, likes of Apple and stuff. They didn't invent the mouse, so they took some of that stuff and they enhanced it. So I think there's definitely something about taking ideas, stealing them with pride, and building on them. And you might argue something like video banking from NatWest Group's a great idea. If that's a neat way to do that. I think for me, if I was to pick on where I think things are going next or where they need to go, it's probably the personalization side. So I think for me that's around saying, look, it's about getting, and that's maybe mimicking financial services when it was in a very face-to-face environment. You got a personal touch. Your bank manager understood you. They knew your needs. So whether that's you being able to simple things like to customize your app. So whether it's about it learning so look, if you go into your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, or if you're Jazz, you're going into your TikTok feed, it's personal to you. And I think that, so even little things like opening back up on the thing you last did, or working out what it is you're going to do. Maybe you just ping them a notification today, you just received some money. So actually, when it lands in the app, take them to the money that's just come in, because they might want to move it into a pot. Maybe it's about saying, do you know what? You can automatically move this into a pot each time this transaction comes in. It astounds me again if I look at, one of my banks who I have a mortgage with shows me my mortgage balance on the home screen every time I come in. I don't want to see my mortgage balance every time I log in to my app. Yes, it doesn't give me the option to hide that. It doesn't give me the option to change what appears on my home screen. So I think for me, that personalization almost takes the user experience to a user experience of one. So it's about, right, what is it that's important to me? What do I want to do? Do I want a list of favorite payees? Yes, please. Do I want to be able to delete ones I've paid 3 years ago because I don't want them appearing in the list? Yeah, maybe it's my ex-wife. I don't know. So there's a lot. I think there's lots of examples. But for me, personalization is probably the area that I think people can create then most of the differential in the user experience.
Yeah, just to go off the back of that, Mark. I think I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think the next step as well is maybe, I think we've seen a lot of propositions, a lot of digital challengers who displaying information very well, and I think transaction feeds again becoming the norm. But for me, I think there's a data to information, and I think there's an information to knowledge jump that's going to happen soon. So spending categories and spending pots are great, but there's no kind of action there. It says here's where your spending is, and that's information, which is great, but I think there's going to be more of a goals-based shift. So eventually you'll go into your banking proposition or your challenger bank or whatever your account is, and the first set of questions they will ask you will be, you've opened this account, what are your goals for the next 6 months, 12 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years? What are you looking to achieve? What are you trying to get from your money? And then they'll look at your spending, and then they'll say, look, based on what you've said you want to do, it's kind of different to what you're doing. Here's the gap. And that will be the knowledge that the banks will eventually give you based on the learnings that they'll get over time. And I think that's where there's a bit of a gap at the moment, where we have loads of information, which is great, but we don't get that knowledge back based on that data analysis and based on expertise within lots of fintechs and financial services institutes, like financial advisors who could put some of these suggestions in a non-financial advisory form.
Very much so.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe what Jazz said, taking that a little bit further. I think the expectations of the customers are also growing, right? And it's really interesting that once we experience something, we just expect the same thing from all the other things, just automatically. And if it doesn't work like that, then we're like disappointed and frustrated. But I think it also goes down to a lot of the services which are typically offered, especially in the card space, are so streamlined and they're so clear, they're so traditional, they're so understandable. But can the financial institutions actually extend that and get something else out of it, right? Advice is a very good example. Setting goals is a very good example. But what about dealing with your transactions in as close to real time as you want? What if at the point of sale terminal, you could say that you want that specific transaction to go into your BNPL instead of actually going in directly into your current account and charging your current account with it? What if you could do that afterwards? What if you could? So extending the offering, especially given the financial hardship, especially given the changing circumstances of lives of many people, how can the banks actually create that experience that actually satisfies not only digitally things in terms of user interfaces and smooth and speed of operation, but also extending the offering, not by saying, oh yeah, we also now have this amazing savings account, but how can you actually integrate that experience all together? So I think that is the next thing that will evolve in the coming couple of years, right? Because that is also something that technology actually enables banks to do, right? There are actual building blocks to do that, but the question is, do the actual product people on the financial institution side want to do that? Do they know that they want to do it? Are they ambitious enough? Are they thinking outside the box in that sense? That's really interesting.
I mean, I'll take Jazz's point about a goals-based vision, and I'll even go a step further, and I compare it to Netflix. If I'm scanning on Netflix, then based on the stuff I've seen, I get shown all sorts of stuff which I've never even dreamed of looking at, and occasionally they find me something quite interesting. So actually, you take that Netflix paradigm, you put that into a challenger banking app or an app with the right UX, and suddenly there's a product there where, oh my God, 58 other people have done this in a similar circumstance to you. Like, oh, that's quite interesting. I've never heard of that thing before. Maybe I'm interested in that. So actually, it's that sort of cross-sell based on data, based on what other people have done. I think that's the end direction when you've even gone further than goals-based. I think goals-based is absolutely there, but can you go further still based on open banking data, etc.? Really powerful.
Wow, I love all of those ideas. I look forward to personalization of my apps. I look forward to being able to set my own goals, integrated experiences, and just having a Netflix of my financial apps. Look, guys, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for spending time with us to talk through your experiences, your thoughts and reflections. So thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.